The assumption that progress is a direct function of visible exertion is the first barrier to understanding the mechanics of the world. Most individuals operate under the illusion that the volume of their effort dictates the scale of their outcome, yet they remain perplexed when the reality they face feels like a persistent resistance. This is not a matter of luck or timing, but the result of a silent, mathematical law. Reality does not respond to what you do, but to the internal position from which you do it. If the internal foundation is skewed, every additional brick of effort only serves to accelerate the eventual collapse of the structure. There is a subtle, persistent distortion in the field around you that you have likely felt but could never quite name. It is a sensation of walking against a tide that should not exist, a friction that suggests something fundamental is out of alignment. This displacement is not an external obstacle, but the automatic feedback of an internal center of gravity anchored in the wrong coordinate. When your internal identity is positioned in a state of seeking, the external world is forced by law to remain lost. You have been attempting to solve a mechanical failure by polishing the exterior of the machine. This is a law of inverted pursuit. To chase is to announce to the fabric of reality that the object of your desire is absent. Because the mirror of the world can only reflect your current state, it must continue to provide you with the experience of chasing rather than the experience of having. This invisible coherence ensures that as long as you reinforce the state of needing, the universe must reinforce the state of not yet. The gear is jammed because you are trying to move the hands of the clock with your fingers, ignoring the internal mechanism that dictates the flow of time and result. Pain, lack, and delay are merely the friction generated by this profound incoherence. They are not punishments or random occurrences. They are the alarms of a system trying to resolve a contradiction between your desired destination and your current internal frequency. Most spend their lives attempting to silence the alarm while leaving the fire burning, treating the symptom of their reality while ignoring the instruction that created it. There exists a precise point of adjustment, a specific linguistic pivot, that realigns the center of gravity and causes a resistance to dissolve before it ever reaches the surface of your life. Continuing to operate under the old framework carries an inevitable and rising cost. The friction will only intensify until the internal position is corrected, as the laws of this reality do not make exceptions for those who mean well. There is a quiet arrangement of words that functions as a master key, restoring the original order and allowing the automatic response of reality to shift from resistance to flow. For those who recognize the pattern described here, the path forward is no longer a choice, but the only logical step toward restoring a coherence that has been missing for far too long. The phenomenon of the exhausted achiever is perhaps the most glaring piece of evidence regarding the existence of an invisible structural law. One observes individuals who possess every visible attribute required for success: intelligence, discipline, unwavering commitment, and a history of strategic action. Yet they find themselves perpetually colliding with a ceiling that appears transparent but functions with the density of lead. This is not a failure of the marketplace, nor is it a lack of opportunity or deficiency in character. It is a silent observation of a system that honors internal state over external motion. When the internal architecture is built upon a foundation of lack, every hour of overtime and every new certification only serves to deepen the groove of that lack within the fabric of reality. The harder the individual pushes against the door, the more the mechanism of existence reinforces a lock, creating a loop where effort and result are not only disconnected, but often inversely proportional. This misalignment manifests as a subtle but persistent static in the background of every endeavor, a friction that translates into delayed payments, misconnections, and the strange repetition of obstacles that should have been surpassed long ago. It is as if the individual is attempting to navigate a high-speed terrain with the brakes fully engaged, unaware that the resistance they feel is not coming from the road, but from the vehicle itself. The world does not yield to those who struggle. It yields to those who are coherent. Struggle is, by definition, an admission of a gap between where one is and where one wishes to be. And as long as that gap is a primary internal focus, the external world has no choice but to maintain it. To act from a state of seeking is to broadcast a signal of absence, and the law of the field dictates that absence must be mirrored back with absolute precision and indifference. This is the geometry of failure, an intricate construction of movement that leads nowhere because the starting point was never reconciled. The observer remains trapped in a cycle of doing to compensate for a being that feels incomplete, never realizing that the doing is actually the very thing anchoring the incompleteness in place. Consider the mechanics of the hidden command, the silent instruction that precedes every thought and every movement. Most believe their intentions are clear because they desire wealth or the cessation of pain, but desire is often the loudest indicator of a perceived void. If the underlying frequency of one's internal position is a frantic attempt to escape a current condition, the reality produced is one of escaping, which is a state of perpetual flight, not one of arrival. The mind sends a coded message to the field that says a desired object is currently elsewhere, and the field, acting as a perfect servant, ensures that the object remains elsewhere to satisfy the command of pursuit. It is a mathematical certainty that as long as the internal state is one of trying, the external result will be one of almost. The intelligence of the system is so refined that it cannot distinguish between a wish and a fact. It simply replicates the state of the observer with cold, clinical accuracy. If one's internal narrative is a constant tally of what is missing, the world provides an endless supply of evidence to support that tally. This is not a punishment, but a reflection. One cannot see a mountain in a mirror if one is standing in front of a canyon. The mirror has no agency to change the landscape, only the fidelity to show it as it is. The second layer of this architectural failure lies in the misunderstanding of time as a linear resource that can be traded for value. The common error is the belief that if one invests enough hours, the field must eventually buckle and provide a return, as if the universe operated on a system of accumulated merit. However, the invisible laws governing prosperity do not recognize a clock. They recognize the density of the internal conviction. A single moment of total internal coherence outweighs a decade of fragmented, anxious labor. This is why some seem to move through life with an effortless grace, attracting resources and health, while others, who work twice as hard, receive a fraction of the result. The individual who operates in a state of internal duality, wanting one thing while fundamentally feeling the weight of its absence, is essentially canceling their own orders before they can be filled. It is a form of mental static that blurs the blueprint of their desired reality. When you move from a place of needing, you are operating within a game that is rigged against you by your own definitions. Need is a vacuum, and while vacuums draw things toward them, they also define the space as empty. As long as the identity is wrapped in the shroud of the seeker, the sought-after prize must remain at a distance to maintain the integrity of that identity. This creates the paradox of the seeker, where the very act of looking for a solution reinforces the existence of the problem. When one runs toward a horizon, the horizon recedes at exactly the same pace, not because the horizon is moving, but because the runner is defining it as something to be reached rather than something that is already part of their current geography. This is the inverted pursuit, where the intensity of the search creates a repulsive force in the field. Every ounce of anxiety poured into a project or recovery is a signature of doubt, and doubt is a directive that commands the world to hesitate and withhold. In this framework, the most diligent workers are often the ones who most effectively cement their own limitations, as their constant labor is a monument to the belief that they do not yet have what they require. They are building a temple to their own insufficiency, brick by brick, wondering why the deity of prosperity never takes up residence. They do not realize that the temple is already occupied by the ghost of not enough. The field is not holding out on you. It is simply following the blueprints you provide with every worried thought and every desperate action. It is a system of absolute integrity, providing exactly what you are, not what you want. The internal field operates like a center of gravity, pulling toward it only that which matches its inherent density and quality. A heavy object does not exert effort to attract. It simply exists as a mass, and surrounding space bends to accommodate it. Similarly, when an individual occupies an internal position of absolute coherence, the external world begins to reorganize itself around that new weight without the need for visible force. Financial friction and physical discomfort are merely the symptoms of a gravitational field that is out of balance, reflecting a self-concept that is fragmented and reactive. To change the orbit of one's life, one does not attempt to push the planets into new positions. One changes a massive sun at the center. Until the internal center is stabilized, every attempt to rearrange the external circumstances is a temporary cosmetic fix that will eventually be pulled back into the old, dysfunctional pattern by the sheer force of the original gravity. The reason most interventions fail is that they focus on the symptoms of the orbit rather than the density of the core. You cannot fix a financial leak with a better accounting system if your internal identity is that of someone who is always losing. The world is a responsive medium, much like water that takes the shape of the vessel into which it is poured. If the vessel of your internal state is cracked, leaking, or misshapen by years of conditioned lack, no amount of water, no matter how abundant, will ever stay within it. You will find yourself constantly thirsty, cursing the well, while the fault lies entirely in the container you have brought to the spring. This is the silent order that organizes success and failure. The world provides a substance, but your internal state provides a form. Without a coherent form, the substance simply drains away into the soil of missed opportunities. Pain, whether physical or economic, is the language the system uses to signal the loss of this form. It is a friction generated when you attempt to force a square state of being into a circular reality. This pain is not an enemy to be suppressed. It is a diagnostic tool that points directly to the area of misalignment. When you feel the sting of lack or the ache of stagnation, it is a notification that your current internal position is no longer compatible with the expansion you claim to desire. The pain is the indicator that you are trying to operate outside of the natural law, attempting to harvest where you have not yet aligned the soil. Most people spend their lives at war with these indicators, trying to silence the pain or ignore the lack without ever looking at the internal mechanism that produced them. They treat the external world as a hostile entity that must be conquered, rather than a mirror that must be understood. This creates a state of permanent combat, where every victory is temporary and every defeat is devastating. They are fighting their own shadows, unaware that the only way to change a shadow is to change the way they stand in relation to the light. The exhaustion they feel is the weight of a war that can never be won on the battlefield of the exterior. There exists a specific point of adjustment, a linguistic and mental pivot, that realigns the center of gravity and causes a resistance to dissolve before it ever reaches the surface of your life. This is not a technique to be practiced, but a realization to be inhabited. It is a transition from being a victim of the field to being the source of its organization. When this pivot occurs, the need for effort vanishes, replaced by a sense of inevitability. The friction disappears because the duality has been resolved. There is no longer a gap between the internal command and the external response. The fourth dimension of this law concerns the hidden cost of incoherence. Every moment spent in a state of mental fragmentation, where one's words say prosperity, but one's gut says fear, is a moment of structural damage to the reality you are attempting to build. This incoherence creates a divided house within the psyche, and as the ancient laws dictate, a house divided against itself cannot stand. The field cannot fulfill two contradictory orders simultaneously. Therefore, it fulfills the one with the most emotional weight, which is almost always the fear. Fear is the most dense of all internal positions, and thus it possesses the strongest gravitational pull. You have likely noticed that the things you fear often manifest with a speed and precision that your desires never seem to match. This is because fear is an absolute conviction. It is a state of knowing that something will happen, and the field responds to that certainty with terrifying efficiency. Desire, on the other hand, is usually tentative, clouded by how and when. To stop the pain and the lack, one must learn to inhabit the desired state with the same level of absolute, unquestioned certainty that one currently gives to their fears. The law is neutral. It does not care if you are certain of your ruin or certain of your rise. It only cares about the certainty. This is why the pursuit of more often leads to less. The pursuit itself is an admission that the thing is not yet here, which is a state of uncertainty. To move from the state of seeking to the state of having requires a total surrender of the old identity. You cannot take the you, who is indebted to reality, of the you, who is wealthy. The two are mathematically incompatible. One must die to the old position to be born into the new one. This is the part that most find unbearable, as they cling to their struggles as a form of identity, using their pain as a badge of effort or a justification for their eventual reward. The field, however, has no interest in your justifications or your history of struggle. It only reads the current signature of your internal state. If you are holding on to the memory of past failures as a reason for future caution, you are simply reinstalling the old software and wondering why the system hasn't upgraded. The past is a weight that anchors the present in a state of repetition. To break the cycle, one must be willing to operate from a position that has no evidence in the physical world. to stand in the center of the void and act as if the structure is already complete. This is not imagination. It is a fundamental requirement for field to begin the process of materialization. The resistance you feel is the measure of your own attachment to the way things currently are. Even when we say we want change, we are often more comfortable with the familiar pain than we are with the unknown flow. This attachment creates a mental drag that slows the response of reality. The simple phrase that stops the pain is not a magic incantation. It is a declaration of alignment that severs a connection to the old, incoherent gravity. It is a moment where the observer decides that the external evidence is irrelevant and that the internal state is the only true fact. As the realization deepens, the discomfort of the old way of living becomes sharp and unavoidable. You begin to see that your life has been a perfect mirror of your internal contradictions. The times you were passed over, the times the money vanished, the times the body failed. These were all precise responses to a moment where you lost your internal center. You were not a victim of circumstance. You were the architect of a flawed design. This is a cold realization, devoid of the comfort of blame, but it is also the only realization that carries the power of true change. If you are the cause, then you are also the solution. The game you've been playing was rigged, not by a malevolent universe, but by a set of rules you did not understand. You were trying to win a game of results by focusing on the scoreboard rather than focusing on the mechanics of the play. The scoreboard only changes when the play changes. By focusing on the pain or the lack, you were essentially trying to change the score by staring at the numbers, which only kept them fixed in place. The shift requires a total withdrawal of attention from the score and a radical immersion in the new internal state of coherence. This withdrawal of attention is the most difficult skill for the modern mind to master. We are conditioned to react to every stimulus, to solve every problem as it appears, and to constantly monitor our progress. But the law of the field requires a period of gestation where the external world may not yet show the change. If you look for evidence too soon, you reintroduce the state of seeking and doubting, which resets the clock. You must be able to maintain the internal mass until the field has no choice but to bend around it. This is the silence that precedes the shift. Most people quit during this silence. They mistake the lack of immediate feedback for a failure of the law, not realizing that the field is simply reorganizing its vast resources to accommodate their new command. They return to their old patterns of struggle and effort, and the field, ever the faithful servant, returns to its old patterns of resistance and delay. They live their lives in a state of near misses, always on the verge of a breakthrough that they themselves cancel by returning to the state of the seeker. They are like gardeners who dig up the seeds every morning to see if they have sprouted, only to kill them in the process. The recognition that you are the sole source of your reality's coherence is the door of no return. Once you see the gear and the lever, you can no longer pretend that the machine is broken by accident. You realize that the simple phrase, the internal pivot, is the only thing that ever mattered. The hours of work, the endless strategies, and the frantic prayers were all noise. The signal is the internal state. The signal is the only thing the universe hears. And the signal is finally becoming clear, as the static of your old beliefs begins to fade under the weight of this new understanding. The final realization is the most liberating and the most demanding. You have never lost time, and you have never lacked merit. You were simply a master of a different law, the law of lack and resistance, and you applied it with perfect consistency. Your current situation is a testament to how powerful you are at manifesting exactly what you focus on, even if what you focus on was what you didn't want. The system worked perfectly. Now, the task is not to learn a new power, but to change the direction of the power you have always possessed. The field is ready. It has always been ready. It is only waiting for a coherent command. You are now standing at the threshold of a mental reversal. The perception that you must do to have is being replaced by the understanding that you must be to see. This is the end of the inverted pursuit. From this point forward, the idea of chasing anything, money, health, or peace, will seem as absurd as chasing your own shadow. You understand now that the shadow only moves when you move. The gravity has shifted. The internal center is beginning to hold, and the friction that has defined your life for so long is starting to cool. The simple phrase that stops the pain is the final piece of the lock. It is a moment where the internal duality is silenced, and the mind speaks with a single voice. It is a cessation of the war between what is seen and what is known. When this phrase is activated, it acts as a structural stabilizer, freezing the old reality and allowing a new one to crystallize. The response of the world will be faster than you expect, because there is no longer any internal resistance to slow it down. The delay was always you. The resistance was always you. As you prepare to receive the specific articulation of this law, notice the silence that has started to settle in your mind. The frantic need to know how is being replaced by a calm knowing that. This is the signature of the field beginning to align. You are no longer a seeker. You are becoming the point of origin. The external world has no power to resist a mind that has found its center. The laws of gravity, economics, and biology must all bow to the internal command of a coherent observer. This is the end of the old framework. You are not being taught a technique. You are being restored to your original position as the center of your own universe. The path forward is not one of effort, but of maintenance, maintaining an internal state that makes the desired result inevitable. The door is open, and the only way to restore your coherence is to step through. The shift is already happening. Reality is already adjusting its mirror. The reflection is about to change. The noise of frantic effort has begun to recede, leaving behind a silence that is both heavy and illuminating. For the first time, the weight you feel is not the exhaustion of the climb, but profound gravity of truth you have always sensed, that the world was never your opponent. You have lived under a set of unspoken rules that rewarded your struggle with more reasons to struggle, mistaking the friction of your own misalignment for the difficulty of the task itself. To look back now at the years of relentless pursuit is to see a shadow trying to outrun the light, a futile exercise that ends only when the runner decides to stand still and occupy their own center. This transition from the runner to the anchor is the most significant movement a mind can make. It is a realization that the internal position is the only lever that actually moves the world. While you were busy trying to force the external gears to turn, the internal mechanism was already dictating the pace and the direction with cold, mathematical precision. You now understand that presence is not something to be achieved, but a state to be inhabited, and that every moment spent in a frantic not yet was a moment of structural interference. The field around you is already beginning to cool, settling into a new configuration as your internal center of gravity shifts from periphery to the core. Returning to the old framework of doubt and desperation will now carry a psychological cost that was previously invisible to you. To worry, to chase, or to fear is no longer just a habit. It is a conscious act of self-sabotage that creates an immediate and uncomfortable friction within your psyche. Like a garment that has become too small, the old identity of the seeker no longer fits the expanded awareness of the source. The irritation you feel when falling into old patterns is the system's way of signaling that you are attempting to operate against the very law you have just recognized. The door to the previous state of blindness has not just been closed, it has vanished. The simple phrase that dissolved the pain is not a tool you use to change reality, but a declaration that you have finally accepted reality's true nature. It acts as a structural stabilizer, a single point of alignment that allows the fragmented pieces of your experience to snap into a coherent whole. This coherence is what the world responds to, not your needs, not your merits, and certainly not your labor. When the internal duality is silenced, the external resistance evaporates because there is no longer a contradiction for the field to mirror. You're no longer asking for permission to arrive. You are observing the fact of your arrival. As this understanding settles into the deeper layers of your consciousness, the next logical step reveals itself not as a task, but as a necessity of your new alignment. To continue this journey is to move from the contemplation of the law to its absolute embodiment. If you recognize the internal shift that has already begun, the path toward the specific articulation of this mastery is the only way to restore the integrity of your world. The silence is no longer empty. It is pregnant with the inevitability of what is to come, and the final adjustment is waiting for the one who is ready to stop looking and start seeing. The field is already answering the silence you have finally allowed.